This is Module 3. The video is Understanding Freud and Why He Loved His Mother. Well, hello, members of the Human Sexuality online course. Today I want to talk to you about Sigmund Freud and psychoanalytic theory. Now this is just one of the theories covered in this module, but I thought maybe we should spend a little extra time on Freud because first of all, he'll come up in many of your other classes, even outside of psychology, and second, his theories, well, they're complex and they need a little bit of explanation. Stop here and start the recording at this point. Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, whenever you happen to watch this. Today I'm going to talk to you about understanding Freud and why he loved his mother. Now, while psychoanalysis, which Freud created, is but one of the theories discussed in this module, Freud and psychoanalytic theory come up regularly in psychology and actually in many other courses too. And the other reason I wanted to spend some time on this is because Freud's theories usually require some explanation. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. Now, as we'll discover, one of the central claims of Freud's theory is that, well, little boys really love their mothers, and Freud was no exception. This idea is based loosely on the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex, which was a story about a couple who had a baby boy, brought him to the temple to be blessed by the prophet, and the prophet said, "What a lovely boy. He'll grow up to marry his mother and kill his father," which of course distressed the two parents. And Freud's father, there's a little Freudian slip for you. Oedipus's father wanted him killed, so he sent him, but Oedipus's mother had him sent far, far away to be raised, so far away that the prophecy couldn't possibly come to pass. Only it did. Oedipus grew up, decided to roam the countryside, met his father on the road and killed him because he thought he was a thief, and came into the kingdom where his mother was now grieving and ruling, fell in love with her because there was just something about her, and there you have it. He killed his father and married his mother. And when he found out, he poked out his eyes. Now, if this explanation sort of skimps on details, I invite you to click here, if you see, for Oedipus Rex as performed by vegetables. It's the entire story in about 8 minutes, and it's wonderfully done. Now, I should warn you that there is a representation of vegetables having sex, but other than that, it's pretty good. You should try it. All right. So, Freud was an accomplished physiologist, a medical doctor, and a renowned clinician. And he's made many contributions to psychology in terms of talking about the unconscious. His theory led his daughter Anna Freud to coin many defense mechanisms that we use. Freud's theories have caused a lot of other theories to spin off, and usually people who disagreed with Freud and then started their own theories. But in any way, however it was accomplished, he has contributed a lot to the field. Like Freud, later psychodynamic theorists would believe that this theory tries to explain both conscious and unconscious forces that shape human personality, and as well as motivation and behavior. So we're talking about what came from Freud's early work eventually was a therapeutic approach designed to examine, correct, and balance disruptions in the client's personality. So while Wundt and others were trying to unearth the building blocks and the processes of the conscious mind, and the behaviorists were saying mind doesn't matter at all. Freud not only talked about mind, but he went beyond the conscious and talked about the unconscious. You may be familiar with Freud's ideas of personality and the way that the human personality is like an iceberg, and the part that's above the surface, the part we're aware of, is our conscious. But he said that the majority of what and who we are exists below the level of consciousness, as represented by the iceberg under the sea, so in our unconscious. And Freud was going to take the position that many of the problems or ways that we behave as an adult are fueled by unresolved conflicts which linger in our unconsciousness. And you may also remember that he said that personality was sort of, the goal of personality was to control these deep down unconscious desires in a real world. So the id was that part of our personality completely submerged in our unconscious, and it's all about instinctual desires. I want, I need, I want to eat, I want to run naked through the grass, I want to have sex, that kind of thing. Now the ego controls the id by deciding, is it safe to indulge the desires of my id. So for instance, if I wanted the coffee you're drinking just now, my id would reach through the screen if it could and take your coffee and drink it because I want it and you have it, so why not, right? But my ego tells me, well, my ego tells you that's not possible. But let's imagine for a second that it was. My ego tells me that probably stealing coffee from my students is not going to get my contract renewed next year, so it's not safe to do that right now. And then the superego is the moral part of the personality, and it kind of is created by the norms and values of the culture we live in. So whatever our society says is good behavior, that's what our superego adheres to. And Freud said that who you are as a person, your personality, was how the ego balanced the needs of the id and the values of the superego in a way that enabled you to live everyday life. So, I just wanted to take a minute to note the distinction between psychoanalytic theory and psychodynamic theory, which you may have come across. You've probably come across both these terms in description of Freud's theories. So psychoanalytic is a theory that Freud originally came up with. This is the theory we associate with Freud, and it's psychoanalytic theory which becomes the base for all other theories that come after. Now, Freud's theories and all others who built on Freud's theories, we refer to those as psychodynamic theory. So just so you know, a lot of people use it interchangeably, but now you know the correct way to do it. So, what distinguishes Freud and psychoanalytic theory from all those who came after? All those included in the term psychodynamic theory. And basically, well, the thing that distinguishes Freud is his concentration on sexual appetite and sexual desires, which is also incidentally why he's in this module. He was the first to present a theory to explain human psychosexual development. And yes, you heard me correctly. So Freud comes up with a theory of development based on not only the way we think about things, react to things from our unconscious, but also based on how as early as birth to the first year of life, we've responded to certain psychosexual crises. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Freud is famously reported to have said, and I wasn't there when he said it, so I don't know for sure, but he's supposed to have said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And the explanation of that is that Freud thought that we resort to imagery to he said that human beings, when they're faced with their raw desires, those things that reside in the id, and when they come to the surface, they trouble us because, oh, we're supposed to be good. In Victorian society, we weren't even supposed to think about sex unless it was to have babies. So there was a lot of guilt involved. And according to Freud, when we're faced with that guilt, we'll come up with more pleasant ways to think about it. So instead of thinking about, oh, I want his penis, we'll have a dream about a tower that is a phallic symbol resembling the penis. But the tower itself is something that's more palatable to us, so we dream in symbols. And then, so part of what Freud did is he would analyze his patients' his clients' dreams to see what was going on in their unconscious. But then he said sometimes if you dream about a cigar where you're holding a cigar, it's just a cigar. But he also suggested, if you chew your pen, that you have sort of a phallic obsession. Phallic being anything to do with penis or penis-like. So how did Freud come up with his theories, you might be asking? Well, most of his theories come from his interviews with his patients. And he would see patients for, years at a time. Not at a time, because that's a long time to sit in the office, but ongoing, he would see them over several years. And they would talk to him about their symptoms. Now, Freud's patients were mostly middle-aged, middle-upper-class Victorian women. He did see some men, but you had to be rich enough to afford, to see a therapist for a year or more. And many of the women who came to him were seeking relief from their hysterical symptoms. Yes, you heard me right. So in Victorian times, hysteria was thought to be any condition with real physical symptoms with no clearly identifiable physical cause. So if you're experiencing headaches, but you didn't actually bang your head, then this could be a hysterical symptom. If you're experiencing fever but you don't seem to be sick, then it was interpreted as a symptom of hysteria. Now, originally, and again, mostly women were diagnosed with hysteria, although sometimes men were too, which seems kind of tricky to me, because originally hysteria was thought to be caused by the wandering womb or the wandering uterus. If you look at the picture on the screen here, you can see that there's a kind of serpent-like creature ravaging this woman's body. It's her uterus gone crazy. So, if you are experiencing fever for reasons you don't know, or pain in your hand, you're experiencing fever, it could be that your uterus is in your brain causing trouble, or in your hand causing you to experience pain with no observable physical cause. Now, Freud, you'll be glad to know, kind of went a step beyond this. I think by Freud's time, probably most people knew that organs did not dislodge themselves and wander around the body causing havoc. So Freud looked for deeper, more substantial causes. He looked for reasons stemming from inside a person and their unconscious needs and desires. Freud thought that his adult patients suffered from unresolved psychological issues, some of which dated back to childhood. So in talking with his patients, Freud came to believe that perhaps his patient's suffering was able to be traced back to early childhood experiences of sexual abuse, because many of his patients reported remembering being sexually abused by adults, sometimes family members, as children. And Freud thought, well, this is a really good reason for some of the problems that we're seeing presenting his hysterical symptoms. So he came up with this idea that early childhood sexual abuse could cause problems in adulthood, which might seem to you kind of common sense, but at the time it wasn't. He called this came to be known as seduction theory. And he called early sexual abuse infantile sex scenes, which caused problems in his adult patients. He presented this in a 1896 paper called The Etiology of Hysteria. but it wasn't really well received. People said that they were outraged that he would suggest that adults would ever touch children in that way. Unfortunately, it's likely that Freud's patients were telling the truth and that many of them were abused by adults, sexually abused by adults when they were children. But it was not something that society in Freud's time was ready to hear. So Freud, he was still convinced that his patients were telling him the truth, but he really sought to come up with a way to explain, well, how they could be telling the truth without this horrible thing being true. And he said, well, maybe his patients were inventing these stories as ways to explain away unresolved psychosexual crises. And so it's because of this idea that he eventually comes up with the theory of psychosexual stages of development. So you might have heard about cognitive stages of development. You know, Piaget talks about how children learn things and when they acquire certain skills. Well, for Freud, development is a series of psychological and sexual stages. And each stage has a challenge that needs to be dealt with in order to advance to the next stage. So instead of the challenges being cognitive, as they say someone like Piaget would suggest, or physical, like learning to walk, learning to talk, for Freud, the most important challenges faced by the developing individual are these psychosexual tests or desires. So Freud believed that when we're born, right away we have certain sexual or pleasure-oriented urges. So for example, when you're born, you're in the oral stage of development. Why? Because your center of pleasure is oral. It's your mouth. And you may have noticed that babies, well, they feed by sucking on a breast or a bottle. And if they can, they will put anything in their mouths. Anything, which is kind of why you have to watch what babies can grab, you know, because marbles and things would not be good. And Freud believed that we progress through different stages of these sexual needs, and in each stage we learn to gratify these needs. So in the oral stage, gratifying the need, you may suck your thumb, or a soother. Right, and he said that we come to a place where we work through this need, and then as we progress developmentally, the center of pleasure changes. So from 2 to 4 years, for instance, children, instead of concentrating on what they put in their mouths, they start concentrating on what comes out the other end, especially during the potty training years. And as you can see from this list of psychosexual stages, this goes on right through puberty. So this slide here might explain it more clearly. In each stage of development, there's a site of pleasure, sexual pleasure, which Freud termed libido. For the first 2 years, it's the mouth. So the baby explores the world by sucking, mouthing, putting things in its little mouth. In the potty training years, it's the anus. Yes, I said anus. And in each of these stages, there's sort of the developmental part is learning to satisfy the pleasure without becoming obsessed with satisfying that source of pleasure. So, for instance, if you get stuck in one of these stages as a child, then you're going to have problems in later life. So getting stuck is fixation, which we'll discuss a little bit more in the next slide. And you can tell that a child had unresolved issues in these stages by the kind of outward signs they demonstrate in their adult life. So if you were stuck in the oral stage where you really just never got over this need to have oral stimulation, you might be a person who chews gum all the time, or chews a pen, or smokes, or eats. Similarly, if you were fixated on the anal stage, and the anal stage is especially difficult because you're learning that your parents want you to potty when you go on the toilet and not potty when you're wearing your good Sunday dress or your good Sunday suit. So there's a struggle, right? A power struggle between when you poop and when you don't. And Freud said that little kids that if they learn to potty train in a reasonable time, they resolve this struggle, and then as time goes on, they move into the phallic stage, which is ages 4 to 6. That's the important one we're going to talk about. But if they don't, if they don't negotiate the anal stage successfully, for instance, say they think to themselves, you know what, I'm not going to poo for you, I'm going to withhold it. So they're going to, hold themselves tight, so they grow up to be the kind of these excessively control-oriented people, the ones with their desks are just so, and their houses are just so, and they've got 3 different kinds of, I might be describing you, I'm sorry if I am, but it kind of evens out because, so if you're excessive, if you learn to that stage to withhold and control things so nobody could take it from you, you became anal retentive as far as Freud was concerned. On the other hand, you might decide, you know what, I'm not going to poo in a pot for you. I'll poo wherever I like. I'll poo in my diaper. I'll wipe it on the walls. I'll just poo, 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 poo. That's the anal expressive stage, and you can tell an adult who was fixated in that particular manner because they're messy people. Their desks have piles of paper. They just have stuff all over the place, out of control. And if you were identified with the anal retentive, it might make you feel better to know that right now my desk is crazy and there's pieces of paper stuck all over my wall, and I probably would be identified by Freud as being anal expulsive. So I hope that makes you feel better. If not, well, there you go. So in this list here, you can see they only talk about the first 3 stages, but what happens if you're fixated or blocked, or you don't negotiate development through those early stages of life? Here's an example of what could happen, how this could affect your personality as an adult. So anal, if the toilet training is too harsh, too lax, it could lead to anal retentiveness or anal explosive or expressiveness. So you could be obsessively tidy or obsessively messy, right? But the one that we're most concerned with, really, for our purposes in human sexuality is the phallic stage. The phallic stage is when children discover their sexual desire to possess the opposite sex parent. And when Freud came up with this idea, he was actually thinking mostly about little boys who become obsessed with marrying their mothers. Oh wait, they can't marry their mothers because their mothers are married. Killing their fathers so that they can marry their mothers. You might be thinking, really? A 5-year-old is thinking this? But, listen on. So this is, incidentally, where the story of Oedipus comes in. Because remember, Oedipus was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother. Well, according to Freud, every little boy kind of goes through his own individual version of the Oedipal complex. And this happens between 4 and 6 years old, where every little boy falls in love with his mother, wants to possess her sexually, and knows that the only rival for this is his father. So he wants to kill his father. And you might think, well, why aren't more children killing their parents if this is true? But Freud had an explanation for that. He said, well, what happens is the little boy comes to realize that his father is bigger and more powerful than he is. And at some point, the little boy might have a sister or see his mother in the bathtub or something and realize that, oh my God, she doesn't have a penis. Somebody must have cut off her penis. I'm not making this up. So he said that little boys develop castration envy, which is the fear that someone will castrate you, or that is, cut off your penis. The little boy comes to fear that if his father finds out that the little boy is competing with his father for their mother's affections, the father might react angrily and cut off the little boy's penis. So to avoid this, instead of continuing his campaign to kill his father to marry his mother, the little boy says, you know what? I'm going to grow up and be just like Daddy, so someday I can have a mother of my own, which is a little kind of warped. True. There is no credible evidence for this, except if you Google Oedipus complex or penis envy, which I'm going to talk about next on the computer. Okay, let me get there. So that's for little boys. Eventually, he had to tackle the question of what do little girls do during this stage of their development. And he said that, well, you know, they want to kill their mothers and marry their fathers, basically. And the reason for this is that little girls at some point, it's a terrible realization, and I know all of the women out there watching this will have realized at some point that you don't have a penis. And for Freud, everybody wants a penis. And, you know, it's true that when you have to pee in the woods or write your name in the snow, a penis might come in handy. So what happens is little girls realize they don't have a penis, and they get penis envy. Now, if you recall earlier, no, actually it's next slide, you'll hear me talk about how when my brother was little, he thought his penis was called a wang-do. And I used to make fun of that until I realized that I didn't call my vulva anything. I had no name for that. So Freud might say, aha, maybe you do have penis envy, because, you know, everybody wants to have something. And again, if you go on Google and enter penis envy, you might come across this YouTube video. This little girl sitting on her father's lap, and she's like, Daddy has a penis? And he's like, yeah. And my baby brother has a penis? He's like, yeah. And she's like, well, no, I get my penis. And he says, the father says, oh, well, little girls don't have penises. And she just starts to cry and cry because she wants a penis. So there's incidental support. But again, there hasn't been any kind of, there is no sustainable evidence for this part of Freud's theories. However persuasive and shocking they may be. So in terms of little girls, to successfully negotiate this stage, they eventually decide that they can't kill their mother. So they identify with their mothers and think maybe if they grow up to be just like Mommy, someday they'll marry a man with a penis and they might have a baby with a penis, or they might have a little girl. But still, they would still have to be with someone with a penis in order to do that. So that's how they successfully resolve that stage. If you don't successfully resolve that stage, then you might... if you don't identify with the same sex, and then you might actually come to have unresolved feelings from this stage, and instead of growing up to be happily heterosexual, you might be gay. But that's a whole other lecture. So you might think, well, this is just a little bit different, and you know, many people did think this. But the psychodynamic theory does have a lot to offer us. So first of all, it's the first theory to emphasize the importance of childhood in personality development. Now, most people, in fact, many of the theorists after Freud who continued on in the psychodynamic trend said, you know what, Freud thought too much about sex, and maybe he loved his mother just a little too much. They said, you know, maybe sex isn't the basis of it all. That was one of the cons, one of the critical thoughts about Freud's theory. But you can't dismiss Freud because he had many ideas which still today are compelling. So we talk about things that we've pushed away in our unconscious that come back to our conscious awareness, and you're like, where did that come from? We know now that the childhood experiences do impact how we develop as adults. And Freud in his work also provided a therapeutic approach, the psychodynamic approach or psychoanalysis, which is still being used as a way to treat patients today, to have them talk about just anything until finally the real roots of their problems creep into their conversation. Anyway, that's all for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.